So some breaking news here is we are live from the Middle East in moments. Our Kelly Meyer with news this evening on an iconic American company and a major deal set to be announced by the president. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. Tonight, President Trump is in Saudi Arabia, kicking off a 4-day swing through the Middle East.
Today, we reaffirm this important bond, and we take the next steps to make our relationship closer, stronger, and more powerful than ever before. It is more powerful than ever before.
But back at home, is his one big, beautiful bill, as he puts it, in trouble? I'll speak with Senator Ron Johnson on why he felt the need to give a very public warning. And I'll explain one idea in the bill, how that is to give every single newborn $1,000, every single one of them. Could that happen? Plus, we are taking you out to sea.
We have basically the same authorities as Border Patrol. We just kind of translate them to the maritime environment. But we're locked arms. You're not getting by us.
What our Allie Bradley is seeing tonight out on the open waters as smugglers are looking for a new option far from the southern border. But first tonight, here from the Hill, the president in the Middle East tonight, and NewsNation is learning of some big news for one big American company. Our Kelly Meyer live in Qatar this evening, where she's hearing about a big announcement that is set to come. Kelly?
Yeah, hey there, Blake. So we've been watching for this announcement. Qatar Airways set to purchase potentially hundreds of Boeing aircraft. And now we are learning, a source familiar here on the ground as we are in Doha, Qatar this evening, saying that they are securing this agreement to purchase around 150 planes from Boeing. That could mean more jobs, thousands of more jobs in America coming. And this is set to be announced when President Donald Trump visits Doha tomorrow. I'm told that this could be a $1 billion deal. Up to $100 billion could come in from this deal, and a total of 200 planes expected to also be agreed on in this final agreement. But we know that 150 have been secured, per a source familiar here on the ground. Boeing told NewsNation that it wouldn't confirm the deal. Qatar Airways wouldn't respond to our request for comment. And the White House telling us tonight that they didn't want to get ahead of the president. But there were more deals announced for Boeing today. We know that the Saudi Public Investment Funds, AV Lease, they have ordered up to 30 new single-aisle Boeing 737-8 jets. Boeing announced that today. China also ending its ban on its airlines acquiring Boeing jets after that trade deal that was struck with the Trump administration. So a lot of news for Boeing this week, but we are watching for that major announcement that has been talked about. Many were reporting that they were close to an agreement, but we know tonight that they have secured 150 planes from Boeing in this major deal for the Trump administration and for President Trump to announce here tomorrow as he arrives here in Doha. Blake.
Kelly Meyer on it tonight in the Middle East. Beautiful night there, it looks like, in Qatar. Kelly, thank you so much. We'll catch you back here tomorrow. All right. Joining me now, Mick Mulvaney, former Trump White House Chief of Staff, NewsNation contributor with me this evening. Hello, sir.
Hello, Berman.
The White House, one of the top officials over there in the press shop, is miking up for us. Once that happens, we'll get out there. But give me your perspective on all this. The president heads to the Middle East. You were involved in a lot of these trips.
Couple?
A couple of them. That's one way to put it. What's the thinking right now of the president heading to the Middle East and what he's trying to accomplish there? You just saw that big news from Kelly.
Yeah, what the president's trying to accomplish is news, making good news. These trips are what Americans really want out of their presidents. Democrat, Republican doesn't make a difference. They want the American president to go overseas and be on the biggest stage possible, make these big announcements, and be well received. It's a good PR move for any White House to sort of go overseas and be well received. That's what this is about. Splashy stuff, headline-making stuff, big announcements. That's where they go. Traditionally,
at least recent presidents, they have either gone to Canada or Mexico, or in Joe Biden's case, the UK, I guess sort of like traditional allies. Donald Trump broke the mold because in the first administration, he went to the Middle East. First stop, Saudi Arabia. Second administration, first stop, Saudi Arabia, and to the Middle East. Why do you think that's what he wanted to do, and what does that tell you about sort of how he views his role?
He's not mixing up the world order, but he's an iconoclastic kind of guy anyway. He's not going to do it just because everybody else has done it. If everybody else went to Great Britain first, he's not going to go to Great Britain. Doesn't mean he's slighting the relationship with the British, but no, he's trying to say, look, things are different. I'm not going to France. I'm not going to Germany. I'm going to the Middle East. It's not lost on anybody. In fact, you're right to point out the fact that he went to Saudi Arabia for his first trip, both separate times.
Yeah, I remember covering him at that point. We were all like, what? He's going to Saudi Arabia? But here he is, second time again. All right, so that's some of the big news overseas. Let me bring you back here domestically, Mick, today, because we learned that inflation is the lowest it's been since 2021. Very good news. The headline number at 2.3%. But you texted me this morning and you said, let's look under the hood a little bit. And you think that the White House needs to be careful here because when you look at everyday items, right? Eggs, up 50%.
For the year.
For the year, year over year.
Right.
Coffee, 13.5%. Chewing gum and candy, 6%. Meals, you want to go out for a meal, 4%, so on and so forth. All those are above 2%.
Yeah. You go to my wife right now and say, by the way, it's good news. Inflation's only 2.3%. She's like, why are eggs so expensive? So, yes, the month-over-month numbers came down, and that's a good thing. Still above the 2% the Fed wants. But the year-over-year stuff is still big. The stuff hasn't come down in price. Gas has come down a little bit. Food has come down a little bit. But still, we're still paying much more than we did a year ago. And what politicians of all stripes run the risk of doing is sort of telling people it's better than they feel that it is. How many times we talked about that?
Right. You can't tell people how they feel.
You can't tell people that. You can't say, oh, by the way, inflation is gone when they're still paying more than they want to pay for eggs.
All right. Mick, catch you later in the show.
I'll be here.
Appreciate it. Joining me now here on the Hill, live from the North Lawn, I believe. The principal, no, not live from the North Lawn either way. Whatever. He's live with us. Harrison Fields is the principal deputy press secretary in the Trump White House. Harrison, thanks for being with us tonight here on the Hill. Let me bring you back to the big story that Kelly Meyer just reported, which is a big announcement with Boeing that some 150 planes, give or take, are going to be announced as part of a deal in Qatar here in the upcoming days. How does this fit, Harrison, and thank you for being with us tonight, how does this fit into the bigger picture of what the president is trying to do with the Middle East, and what might you say to those who wonder if this has anything to do with the Air Force One gift?
Well, there's nothing to do with that, and the president is a deal maker, and he wants to make sure that he's prioritizing economic prosperity and partnerships, not just in the United States, but with our allies across the globe. This is why we've seen over $8 trillion of investments pouring into the United States since the president took office. And this is why you're also seeing massive partnerships with the Middle East and American companies, because the president is a deal maker. These countries and these companies are trusting President Trump, his economic approach and his foreign policy approach in doing these type of deals. This is only possible because we have a deal maker in chief as president who prioritizes relationships and prioritizes the American worker.
Give me a window into the thinking, Harrison, of why it was Saudi Arabia and the Middle East right off the bat, because I could take you back to Reagan, and I don't know if you heard Mick and I talking here. I could take you back to Reagan, and 4 of the most recent presidents went to Canada. The others went to the UK and Mexico, but it was Trump in both the first and second terms who decided to start off in the Middle East and specifically Saudi Arabia. Why? Why there?
Because he's the boldest commander-in-chief we've ever had. He is a president that can do the easy thing. He can take the quick trip to London, but he's going directly into the Middle East and doing something that most presidents wouldn't dare to do, which is communicate with a region that has long been forgotten and many people just throw money and throw weapons at and just look the other way. The president wants to build stability in a region that has just been war-torn. And we need to strengthen our relationships with the Middle East, and this is exactly what the president is doing. You see the communications with Israel. He's making sure that we strengthen that partnership.
Why didn't he go to Israel?
Has been to the White House twice.
Why didn't he go to Israel? There have been some questions.
Bibi has been to the White House twice. He's talking to Bibi often. We don't need to do a symbolic visit to Israel to show our support. The president is in lockstep with Bibi and the people of Israel. And he's going to Saudi Arabia because we have a lot of economic interest there. We have a lot of partnerships and deals to be made. And we want to make sure we're bringing prosperity to a region that, for the most part, has been, forgotten about. And more people are focused on nation building in this region than in bringing economic partnerships. So the president is doing a new thing, and I think it's going to transcend average thought.
I want to play a clip from you for you from the president earlier today about what's been going on in the stock markets and with the economy, and I want to get your reaction on the other side.
Oh, it's going to get a lot higher. In fact, I told people 5 weeks ago, this is a great time to buy. I got criticized for that. Now they don't criticize me anymore. People should have listened. But it's going to go a lot higher. You're going to see, we've never had anything like this happen. It's an explosion of investment and jobs, and great companies are coming in. Never seen anything like it.
All right, so the president was taking credit for the economy today when he was abroad, Harrison. But as you know, when there was the negative GDP print just a couple weeks ago, the president said it was Joe Biden's stock market. And when the following day, when J.D. Vance, the vice president, was asked about it, he said it's Joe Biden's economy. Fast forward now, is this the Biden economy or is this the Trump economy? What is the position from the White House?
So two things can be true. We can acknowledge that we inherited an economy that was not thriving, but we can also say that job creation is a direct indication of the president's policies. Lowering inflation is a direct result of the president's policies, the president's tariff policies, tax policy. So two things can be true. No one is saying that we inherited a good economy. This is why we won in such a resounding mandate, because the American people and the foundations of our economy were not strong. The president in 4 months has been able to turn this economy around, bring in historic investment, and we're on the cusp of a massive tax bill that is going to lower taxes for the American people.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that later in the show. But I just heard you say turn it around. So is it his? Is it fully his?
The president is the president of the United States, and he will always take ownership of what is going on in the United States of America. But he could also acknowledge that the economy, just like the border and just like the world, which is on fire, which was on fire under the Biden administration, we did not inherit a thriving country. You know that, your viewers know that, and we know that every single day at this White House. If we inherited an economy and a country that was thriving, the president probably would have never been elected. We inherited a country in disarray, and this president, this administration, is working to turn it around.
All right, Harrison Fields, Principal Deputy Press Secretary over at the White House, with us tonight here on the Hill. Thank you, sir. Talk to you again soon.
See you, Blake.
You got it. All right, still to come tonight here on the Hill. The president's one big, beautiful bill. That's what he calls it, you know. It went under the microscope today, but it's already receiving a little bit of pushback, including from some of the president's top supporters. The fate of tax cuts, no tax on tips, and no tax on overtime. When we return, plus dramatic video as border authorities confront smugglers out in the ocean, our Allie Bradley with the exclusive access. We are talking to Allie live from San Diego coming up tonight. And how about this question? Should every baby born in this country be given $1,000 from the federal government? Why that very well could be the case in the years to come. Welcome to Washington. This is the center of politics. I'm Blake Berman. The Hill is coming right back. See you in 4 minutes. Back here to the Hill on NewsNation. The president's legislative agenda, the so-called one big beautiful bill, started going under a microscope today. The House Speaker, Mike Johnson, even acknowledging that he's trying to find consensus on his own side of the aisle.
I'm not going to give details of the ongoing discussion, but I'm talking to both corners of the conference and trying to find the perfect balance.
House committees here in Washington started to work their way through the bill, which, for example, extends the president's 2017 tax cuts while also adding campaign promises like no tax on tips or overtime. But one Republican senator already says when it comes to this bill, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. He is the Republican from the state of Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, back with us once again live tonight here on the Hill. Senator, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So you had this op-ed out in the Wall Street Journal. We see the headline there, The Ugly Truth About the Big, Beautiful Bill. What's beautiful, Senator, as you see it, and what makes you cover your eyes?
Well, this is my third column in a series of 3, where I've been pointing out since the first of the year that we need to return to a reasonable pre-pandemic level spending. And I laid out the options. I think this was an extraordinary event, the pandemic. We went from $4.4 trillion in spending to $7 trillion this year. That's a 58% increase. There's no justification for that. So we have to return to a reasonable pre-pandemic level. I've laid out options somewhere between $5.5 and at most $6.5 trillion, which would imply a whole lot more savings than the meager $1.5 trillion over 10 years, $150 billion at most. By the way, and then we're increasing spending by $342 billion over 4 years. So again, the savings we're talking about in relationship to the $89 trillion we'll be spending over the next 10 years, it's barely a rounding error.
I heard you just describe it as meager.
It is meager, but at a minimum, we shouldn't be increasing the deficit. And I don't see any scenario that they're discussing right now where we don't actually increase the deficit over 10 years with this big, beautiful bill. So again, I'm all in favor of certainly giving tax relief to middle-income Americans, making sure we don't have an automatic tax increase, providing border funding. But I've always been in favor of a three-step process so we can spend a lot more time on the tax provisions and making sure that we get this type of spending reductions in order to return to a reasonable pre-pandemic level.
Are you disappointed in Republicans here in Washington? I mean, meager, rounding error, that doesn't sound like bold or any sort of change that you might seem proud of.
Well, I've always been disappointed of the Uniparty. We've got big spenders in our party, too. Listen, it's always easy to spend money, especially when it's not yours. It's very easy to always cut taxes. It's very difficult politically to be the guy who says we can't go to Disney World. We can't afford that.
Right.
We've got this massive structural deficit. And by the way, according to CBO, we're going to add about $22 trillion to the deficit over the next 10 years. Go from $37 trillion in debt to 58, 59, over 60 trillion. It's completely unsustainable. This is our one opportunity. Again, Democrats won't help us. They have no problem with that. Republicans have to be the party of fiscal conservatism and control, and right now, we're not.
What about this idea of the SALT cap? So this is one of the issues, right? And you know the issue, but for our audience here on NewsNation or for those listening to us on SiriusXM, that's the state and local deduction, and it benefits a lot of the high-tax states for folks there who end up deducting. And a lot of those states are blue states, right? I had Mike Lawler, he's the House Republican from New York, on the show yesterday. Here's what he told me, and I want to get your reaction on the other side.
I've been very clear from the very beginning. If there was not a fix for SALT in the bill, I would be a no. This proposal by the Ways and Means Committee and the Ways and Means Chairman does not address the issue. We are in the process of working with leadership and the administration on this.
So you are a Republican in a purple state. If the House ends up bringing you a bill that really benefits these homeowners in blue states, does it get your support?
Well, again, my primary criteria is I don't want to expand the deficit, and I want to return to a reasonable pre-pandemic level spending and have a process to achieve it and maintain it. We've never had a process to control spending in Washington, D.C. We don't have a balanced budget requirement.
Yeah.
The Budget Act didn't do it. Simpson-Bowles didn't do it. So, again, I'm a manufacturer. If you don't have a good process, you don't have a good product, this process is rushed. We're not going to have a good product. And by the way, I don't want to subsidize. I want taxpayers to subsidize high-tax states. And that also would expand the deficit. So obviously I'm opposed to what his bottom line is.
Let's cut to it, because at the end of the day, Senator, if nothing gets done, there will be tax increases. And that would be a massive liability for the Senate. It would be a massive liability for the House. And it's why when I have people on the show, they say, at the end of the day, we're going to get something done. These House Republicans are negotiating. You're negotiating, right? And you will in the future. At the end of the day, do you think this gets done?
I can't predict. Again, I would have done 3 steps, provide the border defense funding. Then I would have just extended the current tax code, take that automatic tax increase off the table. That was a blunder in the 2017 bill. We should have made whatever we did permanent, not automatically expiring. So let's not make that mistake again. By the way, they're making the same mistake again in the House proposal. So again, they haven't learned. And then take the time to get the taxes right. And again, that's going to be complex. And also to bring down spending to a reasonable pre-pandemic level. Okay. So again, I'm trying to guide this process so we end up with what ends up being, one big, beautiful bill, which is the 3rd bill in the series.
All right. As they say over at the White House, we'll see what happens. Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin, with us once again tonight here on the Hill. Thank you, sir.
Have a great night.
You as well. Still much more ahead tonight here on the Hill. Drugs, the cartel, and now the Pacific Ocean.
But we're locked arms. You're not getting by us.
A NewsNation exclusive, our Allie Bradley riding along with border authorities what they are seeing on both land and water. Plus, any parent knows every cent counts when having a baby. But what about giving those kids $1,000? We'll explain why it might become reality. All right, welcome back here to the Hill on News Nation. The Trump administration setting the stage for a possible another Supreme Court showdown on immigration. The Department of Justice now asking the High Court to allow it to resume the deportations of nearly 200 suspected gang members detained in Texas through the Alien Enemies Act. It would require them to lift their order from last month, temporarily pausing the deportations. This is new data from April shows that Border Patrol apprehended just over 8,000 people at the southern border last month, a slight uptick from March, though that was a record low. But now that land crossings are becoming more difficult, smugglers are moving out to sea. And today, that is where we find our Allie Bradley, not along the southern border. She is live. Look at that. Good on you, Allie. Live in San Diego today with that beautiful picture. And what'd you see out there? What'd you learn?
Yeah, a little less dusty out here, Blake. But the reality here is that, yeah, we are seeing things tick up when it comes to these coastal sectors. Just as Border Patrol Chief Mike Banks and other law enforcement anticipated, we'd see more traffic at the coast. And the coastal areas on the east side of the country, they're doubling. And for air and marine operations here, also seeing double the amount of incursions. So what exactly is happening here? Well, the southern border is essentially locked down. So that's forcing these cartel organizations, these smugglers, to kind of retake old routes that they were doing before, taking back to the seas, and these kind of dangerous routes that they are making in order to get into the United States. But U.S. Customs and Border Protection, they're more prepared now. They have a lot of federal partners down here working with them, working in lockstep to prevent these incursions and prevent these individuals. And if you don't stop, when they try to pursue you, they'll make you. So we want to show you this recent incident that happened here on the open waters where marine interdiction agents, they were actually forced to disable a vessel after it blew past Mexican Navy and U.S. Coast Guard. They refused to stop, and one of the agents actually had to shoot out one of the engines of the boat, which is actually very small and underwater. Take a listen to what the Air and Marine Operations Deputy Director had to say about this incident and what they're doing on the water.
We're locked arms, and we have interleaving authorities with the Coast Guard. We have basically the same authorities as Border Patrol. We just kind of translate them to the maritime environment. But we're locked arms. You're not getting by us.
Okay, so Blake, they've already had 350 different incidents where they've had to shoot out the engines of these smuggling vessels. They do have a protocol. They try to get these individuals to stop first. If they don't, then they fire warning shots. If they still won't stop, then yeah, that's when they quite literally bring in the big guns. They have to shoot out these engines to disable them. The good news here, though, Blake, out of 350 incidents that they've recorded, 0 injuries. They're already at 17, though, for one unit this fiscal year alone, on track to break a record for having to disable these vessels using force. Blake. That is remarkable. That many and no real severe instances. Wow. Allie Bradley, live for us in sunny Southern California today. Allie, thanks so much. All right, so while the administration continues to crack down on threats at the border, Congress is zeroing in on potential threats from China at American universities. Have you seen the story from the Stanford Review? That is the independent student-run publication. The kids, the students there, they are reporting that a Chinese spy was posing as a student at Stanford, and well beyond that, really, because their conclusion of a lengthy article in the paper was this: the CCP is orchestrating a widespread intelligence gathering campaign at Stanford. In short, there are Chinese spies at Stanford. Now, this comes as the House passed legislation denying Department of Homeland Security funding to U.S. colleges and universities who partner with Chinese academic institutions linked to Beijing's security apparatus. With me now, author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, Gordon Chang, and Tracy Walder, NewsNation national security contributor, or as I say, the best title in the business, former CIA, former FBI, with us as well. Thanks to you both. You read this article. I did too.
First off, it's the Stanford Review. I mean, good on them for this deep dive that they had. And what I found interesting was they described it as a full stack approach to information collection at Stanford. Tracy, but I don't want to zero in on Stanford because the China Select Committee here in Washington sent a letter to 5 other universities recently basically saying, look, you might have something going on here. So how widespread is this?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Blake. I hate to be so blunt, but it's literally everywhere.
Like every university or every state or?
I'm going to go with every sort of large, well-known university. Look, I worked Chinese counterintelligence as an FBI special agent. I hate to sound so blasé about it, but this is nothing new. I am glad that we are paying attention. What is new, in my opinion, is how they are doing it. What they have done in the past is the MSS, which is their equivalent of the CIA, has actively sent people into these universities to get jobs in the research centers there to send that information back. They're doing it very differently now. They're doing it almost virtually, and they're targeting students who were already here and may not have been here under the auspices of spying, and then threatening their parents back home if they don't provide the information. That's the part that's new.
Gordon?
Yes, certainly. Wherever there's a university, wherever there's a college campus, you're going to find some sort of regime elements, either the Ministry of State Security, as Tracy just talked about. You'll find consular officials. It's just everywhere. And every place you have a concentration of students, you have Chinese Students and Scholars Association, CISA, and that is controlled by the Chinese regime because they wanted to monitor, coerce, and surveil Chinese students. So this is everywhere, as Tracy says.
You know, in the article there, they also pointed out, they said, make no mistake, these students are victims of their own. So they basically said that the kids didn't know about this, the students didn't know about this at the time. I guess the next question is, what gets done about it, Tracy? Because the House has put forth this bill, but you know how a bill becomes a law? It goes to the Senate and then the president, right? So, I mean, it's just a bill. So what does Washington do about this, if anything?
Well, I want to actually talk about it from the intelligence standpoint, actually.
Okay, so yeah, please.
What this is telling me is that we're not doing necessarily the best job of vetting some of the individuals that are coming here on these student visas. And in my opinion, from a CIA perspective or an FBI intelligence perspective, if we can't vet them properly before granting them the visa, which is difficult to do.
But you know, Tracy, you know the argument that's going to come is your targeting, right?
Right.
And how do you go about that?
I get it. I fully understand that. But the way that visas work is that, you know, you have to essentially be here for the purpose that you're stating that you're getting that visa from. And we do backgrounds on all of these individuals before we provide them with visas. This is not just Chinese. I mean, this is something we do for everyone, and that's normal. We should be doing that. And just as you mentioned before, some of these students are indeed victims. That's the hard part, right? Is we don't want to just stop this flow completely, but we need to have a better system in place to see under how much control of the CCP these individuals are.
Cato Institute U.S. espionage victims 1990 to 2019, 83%, or I think that's like 6 and 7 or something like that, are from the government. Gordon, what does Washington need to do?
First of all, we need to monitor the consular officials and expel them from our country if they're engaged in this type of activity. We know of Ministry of State Security agents that we've allowed to roam around our country. We need to disband the Chinese Students and Scholars Association chapters because China uses them to monitor students. And by the way, to answer your question to Tracy, I actually think that we're not targeting them. The Communist Party is, and making them a legitimate target of interest because of their system and because of the 2017 National Intelligence Law of China, which requires them to spy if demanded.
All right, we'll leave it there. I'll talk to you both soon. Tracy Walder, NewsNation contributor. Gordon Chang, always nice to see you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, still to come tonight here on The Hill. What do Ted Cruz and Whitney Houston have in common? I promise you, we'll draw a link here. And it has to do with a concept of $1,000 for newborns. Full panel, other side.
The biggest trials in America have big moments this week, and Banfield has it all. Diddy, the Menendez brothers, Brian Kohberger. The case isn't closed until you've seen it on Banfield. Weeknights 10/9 Central, only on NewsNation.
The Hill on NewsNation. Someone really famous once said, I believe that children are our future. You know who it was. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing it. But now, could a new tax law lead to Uncle Sam at some point in time singing the same tune? In the bill that Republicans are putting together up on the House, one of the concepts there is called MAGA accounts, money accounts for growth and investment. And it made it into Trump's tax bill. It's pushed by the Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Here's what it would do. It would allow for the use of taxpayer money to be spent on an investment account in the form of $1,000 for every American child starting at birth. And it would be allowed to be used later in life for college, training, to start a business, or when you get older, even buy a home. Here's how Senator Cruz described it, speaking to Leland Vittert on Balance.
These Invest America accounts, let me give you a simple stat. A newborn baby born next year. Every newborn baby will get an Invest America account. You get $1,000, and if each year you or your family or friends or your parents' employers put $5,000 a year into the account in a tax-advantaged way.
As Cruz would go on to explain, a baby that the government invests at that $1,000 at the time of birth, by the time the child turns 18, enters the workforce or college, with investments of $5,000 a year, if they keep on adding and 7% growth, it would hit up to about $170,000 to kick off their adult life. Might sound great on the surface, as Whitney said. The children are our future. But this is a mandate, not a ballot, if it were to happen. So what about it? Full panel here with me now. Mick Mulvaney, NewsNation contributor, former Trump White House chief of staff. Scott Bolden, NewsNation political contributor as well. Linda Tran, former senior advisor to the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. And T.W. Origi, former communications aide to Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Hello to you all. Be happy I didn't sing, but I gave you the information, so we're all good. Look, I'm sitting back thinking, okay, Social Security, it's a government mandate to make sure we take care of the elderly later in life. What about the concept of a government mandate, in this case, government funds, to make sure that we take care of those who are entering the real world?
You want to take this one, or you want me to take this one?
I will take it.
Okay.
I actually kind of like the idea. Well, here's my broad...
You don't like the idea?
Not at all, but go ahead.
Okay. I'm actually going to take the contrarian view there. I actually do quite like it. Besides historic illiteracy in this country, I think financial illiteracy is really a big topic. And one of the things that Warren Buffett once said, I listened to him and Charlie Munger quotes all day long, is he talks about, obviously, the wisdom in compounding interest.
So show that graphic as TW talks, because Warren Buffett basically made 95% of his wealth after 50 years old.
Yes. And, you know, one person asked him, well, if it's so easy to get rich, Warren, like you were saying, dusting a little bit over time, why don't more people do it? And he said, well, because people don't like to get rich slow. And I think this would be a great chance to teach young people the wisdom in investing over time. Just that $1,000 alone would be almost $500,000 by the time they are 60.
Ted Cruz loves it. TW loves it. Why are you against it?
I remember when Republicans were small government people. I do. I remember way back in the 2010s when I ran. Oh my goodness gracious! Look,
I guess that
if I want to make the case for it, it would be this, because we have this conversation, and conservatives have this conversation about replacing welfare payments with cash. Instead of giving people programs, give them money. And if this is a replacement for something else, let's talk about it. Social Security, not the government's money. It isn't. There's not a single penny of Social Security, of government money in your Social Security. So it costs this is just another government program.
It costs $6.5 billion, give or take, a year to administer Social Security. There's 3.6 million kids in this country, Mick, born every year, give or take $1,000. 3.6 billion. Run some administration fees over it. It's less than Social Security.
Okay, and let's make it 2,000. Let's do 3,000. There used to be a philosophical underpinnings to some of the things that Republicans did. And look, what Ted Cruz is trying to do is get more efficient and get us out of the business of doing all the other welfare programs. Good. I didn't see the whole interview. Maybe that's what he's doing. But this is just another government program, and we used to be against this.
I want to bring in the Democratic voice for a second. I want to start with Linda, because the first thing that you said to me was, Yeah, I remember this because Cory Booker essentially
Exactly.
the Knicks boys.
February 2023.
So I said to Linda, okay, so Democrats would then be behind this?
Well, first of all, yes, Senator Cory Booker introduced the American Opportunity Accounts Act in 2023. What did it have? $1,000 at birth that would go into a bank account that would then have contributions of several thousand depending on family income, and that the outcome, similarly, in theory, when you reach 18, you have to use it to buy a house or to pay for college, right? So here's the principle of the matter. That was based on the concept of essentially baby bonds, universal basic income, and closing a generational wealth gap. The question I think Democrats would have, and whether or not they would get on board with something like this, is what are you taking away? I mean, you've got Mick here talking about big government, all the other things that we spend our money on. In that case, that was going to be paid for by taxes on real estate that was owned by wealthy Americans. So there was a pay for. Where's the pay for here?
Where's my Republican Party?
This right here.
Party, no,
right here. Not over there.
It's all over the place. It's all over the place. The Republicans want to do $1,000, add billions to, this is government money, add billions to the deficit.
After our sovereign wealth fund.
After your sovereign wealth fund, they're investing in people, and then young people, and I like the idea, don't get me wrong, but not only how are they going to pay for it, but how are they going to reduce the deficit while investing in young people? I love the idea conceptually, but I thought I was listening to a Democrat proposal, and it's really a Republican proposal.
What about the question I proposed, which is if you're going to make sure you take care of one group of people, the elderly, what about a different group, which happens to be, in this case, those entering the quote-unquote real world at 18?
Aren't parents supposed to do this? Isn't this, really, that's a question. Aren't parents supposed to provide for their kids? Isn't that part of, I remember Republicans used to think that there was personal responsibility and, the fiscal, sort of discipline. And this is a great conversation about getting rich slow. That's not a lesson I'm supposed to learn from my government.
Well, and I think, by the way, your point about it, if we can then offset welfare and things like that, I think that's all very well taken. And I think that would be the impetus behind it. But look, the business of America is business. I think people having more skin in the game in the American markets is a good thing, not a bad thing. I understand the criticisms. I empathize with a lot of them, and I'd like to see the final package of it. But I do think at its core, it's a good idea.
I can guarantee this, is that now Cory Booker's going to come out with a new program that's $2,000. It has to be better than Ted Cruz.
But this $1,000, it's just one-time investment in all the children. But remember, children are being born every 5 minutes, if you will.
Not enough of them.
Well, annually, you're talking a few billion.
Take your pick, and then they get to take it out at 18 or 21. How are you going to require them to buy a house or whatever you're going to do? They get $170,000 by the time they're 21, I guess. How do you enforce that? And is America disciplined enough? Our poor families, working class families, right? And what are we going to do about this inflation under the Republicans? I mean, will it really go that far?
Here's how I want to end this, because this is part of the bigger package that the president's agenda is in. I want to start with the Republicans real quick, because there's a lot of noise about this is in trouble. Are you worried? Yes or no?
I'll let him take the
You worried? Yes or no?
The bill's not in trouble. Something will pass. They have to extend the Trump tax cuts, but it'd be ugly getting there.
I agree. I agree. I very much agree.
You both are just sitting back watching the Republicans sort of argue amongst themselves, gets passed?
Well, I think, yes. I think the numbers will eventually.
Something gets passed. Because think about it. The Republicans cannot get reelected in 2 years or 4 years if they don't pass this, quote, big, beautiful bill. It just may not be as beautiful as
what happens if the bill doesn't pass, taxes go up on everybody.
Yes. Right. And so that's where... and what I got to with Ron Johnson, when I got to with Senator Ron Johnson at the end of the day, everything right now is kind of a negotiation. And by the way, you saw one interesting thing in this bill. Thank y'all. Appreciate it. Good stuff still to come here. Oh, by the way, I should note, you should see the full interview with Senator Ted Cruz on Balance tonight. Leland Vittert, the senator, 9 o'clock Eastern here on News Nation. Watch more of Leland's interview a couple hours from now. Still to come here on the Hill. All the headlines about the president in the Middle East today, but I'm going to tell you one that you probably missed and why it explains a big change. And Elizabeth Vargas reports coming up here in a few minutes. She is covering all the details to come out of the Diddy trial today. What went on there? My take, other side of the break. Within the past few hours, Major League Baseball removed Pete Rose from their permanently ineligible list. That paves the way for him to potentially be eligible for the Baseball Hall of Fame. It follows President Trump swinging for the fences when he posted in late February that, quote, over the next few weeks, I will be signing a complete pardon of Pete Rose, who shouldn't have been gambling on baseball, but only bet on his team winning. Big news out of Major League Baseball tonight. All right, time for my take now. By now, you probably know about all the pomp and circumstance with the president's trip to the Middle East on day one, right? The fighter jets even escorting Air Force One before it touched down in the Middle East. But a headline you might have missed involved the tiny tech that will make the future: chips. Now, after the Saudis launched a new company to develop its artificial intelligence goals, President Trump reversed U.S. policy that will allow American companies, NVIDIA and Advanced Microdynamics, to sell its world-class semiconductors, or AI chips, to the Saudis. NVIDIA, by the way, is the second largest company in the U.S. at this moment, valued at over $3 trillion after today's news. The top Democrat on the bipartisan House Select Committee immediately raised concerns, saying there needs to be, quote, strict national security safeguards. The translation there is this: there's a worry about those chips eventually making their way to China. In the days leading up to this announcement, the president's AI czar wrote that if we don't relax export rules, we risk pushing our allies into China's orbit. Now, to step back here for a moment, consider some of what I just laid out. Here in 2025, the president is in the Middle East, and a big announcement did not involve oil, rather AI. And at the heart of this policy debate, questions about what it all means in the race against China. And that's my take tonight. We'll see you back here tomorrow, here on The Hill.